Okay, guys, I am now back, and we are going to start reading page 235 out of Project 2025. Last week, apparently, it got heated. Somebody didn't like what I said, so I was bananered for a week, but now we're back. The one thing I have to do is start reading from the beginning again, because once you get bananered, you can't download that for YouTube. So we're going to start on page 235, Project 2025, Media Agencies. Okay, that's where we're going to start for right now. If you're just joining us, I read Project 2025 out loud. I was bananered for a week because it upset somebody, so I'm back to reading it. We are on the 8th chapter, page 235, Media Agencies. I do this live here on TikTok, and I also am live on Twitter right now. If you want to follow along, you can do so. If not, I will re-upload this later on so that you can hear this on YouTube, and I am still working on summaries. If you're just joining us, welcome. If you're not just joining us, you're welcome back. So, first of all, everybody get something to drink. Water, diet soda. And let's get to reading. Okay. Media Agencies, U.S. Agencies for Global Media, Mora Namdar. Mission Statement. The mission of the United States Agency for Global Media, USAGM, is to inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy. However, this mission statement does not reflect the current work of the agency. The mission is noble, but the execution is lacking. To fulfill its mission, USAGM should also aim to present the truth about the American and American policy, not parrot America's adversaries' propaganda and talking points. Overview. Originally formed as the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the BBG, in 1994, the BBG changed its name in 2018 to the United States Agency for Global Media. The USAGM is a sub-cabinet agency of the U.S. government with a budget of just under $1 billion. The agency oversees two government broadcasting networks, the Voice of America, VOA, and the Office of the Cuba Broadcasting, OCB. USAGM also oversees 100% of the grant funding for several independent grantee organizations, including Middle East Broadcasting Network, the MBN, Radio Free Asia, RFA, Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty, RFE / RL, and the newly formed Open Technology Fund, the OTF. The Voice of America provides news and information in 48 languages to weekly audiences of more than 326 million people worldwide. For more than 80 years, VOA journalists have supplied news and information about the U.S. audience-specific regions of interest and concern and the world at large. VOA radio and television signals are broadcast to approximately 3,500 affiliates, and satellite transmissions reach countries where free speech is banned or where civil society is under threat. VOA uses digital, web, and mobile medias as well, which, while sometimes useful in propagating valuable information globally, has created specific violations of the agency's prohibition against broadcasting to domestic U.S. audience, particularly with regard to flagrantly political content, and has been the practice with recent and current VOA content directors and managers. The network once had a generally well-received brand value, but it is deteriorated under a decade of poor leadership and a loss of its once prized unbiased reporting. There are bright spots within the VOA, but the mismanagement and declining production value have diluted a once great reputation as a singular voice in the American news broadcasting abroad. The Office of Cuba Broadcasting. The Office of Cuba Broadcasting oversees radio and television Marti, however that is pronounced, I apologize, a multimedia hub of news, information, and analysis that provides people of Cuba with programs through satellite, television, radio, and digital media. These programs present news and information about Cuba's oppressive government from the outside world that would otherwise be heavily restricted. The OCB remains a critical avenue of truth among the Cuban people, but has been threatened with crippling budget and operational constraints, including empathetic attitudes toward the communist Cuban leadership, coupled with organizational hostility toward the OCB by certain elements. certain elements of the USAMG leadership during the Biden administration, the OCB has been threatened with closure while also suffering chilling reduction in force. The Middle East Broadcast Network. The Middle East Broadcast Network is an Arabic language news organization with weekly audience of 27.4 million people in 22 countries in the Middle East and North Africa. The MBN consists of 2 television networks, radio, website, and social media platforms. Together, they deliver the news and analysis on the region, American policies, and Americana. The MBN has correspondents throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty. Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty is a private, nonprofit multimedia broadcasting corporation that serves as a surrogate media source in 27 languages in 23 countries, including Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, Russia, and Ukraine. Founded in the early days of the Cold War, Radio Free Europe in 1949 and Radio Liberty in 1953 and merged in 1976, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty were interested and intended to execute edgy and daring information operations and unrestricted news reporting deep behind the Iron Curtain. Unfortunately, like other broadcast organizations under USAGM, the RFE/RL has surrendered much of its rich history to an approach that favors political trends as opposed to operations that support and represent America abroad. While there are some bright spots within the RFE/RL, much of the network has redundant programming with certain VOA language services, often with competing counterproductive or dismal messaging. The recent addition to the RFE/RL's Hungarian language service, Század Európa, falls outside of the intended scope of the RFE/RL's charter by targeting a democratically elected pro-American European and NATO ally. Not least, the RFE/RL has been plagued by several serious espionage-related security risks within its ranks. Radio Free Asia. Radio Free Asia is a private, non-profit multimedia news corporation that brings news and uncensored content to people in 6 Asian countries that restrict free speech, freedom of press, and accessible and reliable information. The RFA also provides educational and cultural programming, as well as forums for audiences to engage in open dialogue and freely express opinions. The RFA utilizes on-the-ground reporters and networks of in-country sources, citizen journalists, and other eyewitnesses who provide leads, tips, images, and videos. Several reports from the Office of the Inspector General, the OIG, were released showing the waste and self-dealing, including security vulnerabilities, and the RFA leadership awarding insiders millions of dollars of grant funding. For example, the OIG started in one report, then president of RFA established the Freedom to Connect Foundation, and then thereafter awarded 2 contracts totaling $1.2 million to the foundation she herself founded. Furthermore, the OIG found that the RFA did not comply with federal procurement requirements for grantees. The OIG identified instances in which the RFA and its agents did not comply with OMB, Office of Management Budget, conflict of interest procurement requirements for grantees. Specifically, OIG found that RFA entered into 14 contracts totaling $4 million, 51% of the OTF FY 2012 and 2013 projected related contracts, with organizations that had some affiliation with either RFA officials or members of the OTF Advisory Council. If you're following along, we are on page 238, the Mandate for Leadership. This is Chapter 8, Media Agencies. The same leadership proceeded to wastefully form the Open Technology Fund as its own independent grantee with the help of the USAGM senior management prior to the tenure of the Trump-appointed leadership. The Open Technology Fund's goal is to provide funding to support the research, development, and implementation of Internet freedom technologies and circumvent censorship. OTF was formed under dubious circumstances by using consolidating rules to usurp the mission and funding of the USAGM's pre-existing Office of the Internet of Freedom, the OIF, which funded far more diverse technologies with much greater transparency. OTF, however, operates with far less transparency and strictly restricts funding to open source technology. OTF does not support any technology with even partially closed source code, notwithstanding that such closed source code will provide more protection against hacking. Although the OTF touts large user numbers, this cannot be substantiated upon the request for the information, and was discovered by former senior USAGM leadership that OTF makes extremely small, insubstantial donations to much larger messaging applications and technology to bolster its unsubstantial claims. Despite its vibrant self-lobbying and publicity efforts, OTF remains a wasteful and redundant boondoggle. Its grantee status was suspended by Trump-appointed USAGM leadership for a number of reasons, including noncompliance with its grant terms for actions that resulted in several fraud and waste investigations. The OIF, which predates OTF, was historically under the USAGM's Office of Chief Strategy Officer and for years had been performing the same tasks as OTF with USAGM headquarters for the benefit of all the USAGM broadcast networks. With much greater transparency, OIF succeeded with fewer staff while simultaneously fielding more diverse and robust technologies. Absent and meaningful organizational impact analysis to justify the wastefulness of the decision-making process, OTF usurped the entire OIF budget and was set up as a new grantee organization. Take a drink. Whew. Exacerbating matters, the OIF was shut down in order to provide massive grants to the opaque activities of the OTF and its founding leadership, who went on a free spending boondoggle for high-end Washington, D.C. office space, furnishings, and top salaries for its leadership team. Numerous career staff whistleblowers came forward to sound the alarm about the OTF to Trump-appointed leadership, citing concerns that the OIG reports wasteful spending and other substantiated performance matters. Nonetheless, the Biden administration reinstated OTF to full operational status and ceased all investigations immediately after assuming office. Attempts at reform. Late in the Trump administration, following the long-delayed Senate confirmation of Michael Pack as USAGM Chief Executive Officer, CEO, agency leadership rapidly initiated long-overdue necessary reforms, including security reforms repeatedly requested by the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, that had been ignored by the USAGM leadership. Unfortunately, as was the case with the OTF, the Biden administration immediately reinstated personnel who had been fired for gross security violations, placing the agency back into its previously failed posture, one that poses a danger to national security. The firewall saga. The firewall saga, the vital error in the USAGM's current organizational cultural calculus, is the agency's selective application of journalistic firewall. The amorphous interpretations of firewall shifts depending on which administration is in office and who is asking the questions. Although a firewall should ensure journalistic independence, it has been used. It has been used. I lost my place, I'm so sorry. Without formal regulation for decades in order to shrink legitimate oversight of everything from promoting adversaries' propaganda to ignoring journalistic safety. Often the firewall is touted when journalists are either promoting anti-American propaganda that parrots adversarial regime talking points or promoting politically biased viewpoints in opposition to the VOA charter. Such weak oversight, alien to any other large media network or news organization, particularly one derivative of the U.S. foreign policy and national security goals, was erroneously enshrined in a document known as the Firewall Regulation. The Firewall Regulation was entered into the Federal Register on the eve of the Senate confirmation of President Donald Trump's USAGM CEO Michael Pack. It was quintessential midnight reg designed to throttle the statutory and executive authority of the agency head. It stipulated that agency management by standards unknown to most large broadcast companies was forbidden from engaging in oversight and direction of content in any way, even false content. It ran counter to the law, including the Smith-Mundt Act, which was harmful to the agency of the foreign policy and national security goals of the U.S. government. Even content that went well beyond fair and accurate reporting on the U.S. domestic and political problems could not be reined in by the front office leadership under the Firewall Regulation. Soon, VOA's White House correspondent was posting content highly critical of and personally insulting the U.S. president in contradiction to the VOA's own journalistic standards, policies, and procedures. USAGM career officials considered such content sacrosanct and bravely independent journalistic content protected by the spirit of the firewall regulation, despite ample evidence to the contrary. Late in the Trump administration, USAGM political leadership, following an intensive U.S. Department of Justice review, revoked the firewall regulation over the protests of journalistic organizations, none more serious than the VOA itself. While the abuses of the firewall regulations were particularly disconcerting, they encompassed just a fraction of similarly overreaching of the agency's journalistic mission. Current and former USAGM/VOA leadership, who wanted to maintain virtually zero accountability and oversight, waged a campaign of interference, resistance, and disinformation to stifle change at the agency. Perhaps not coincidentally, various media outlets with relationships to former future USAGM leadership published near daily criticisms of Trump administration appointees and also grantee organizations who were led by the appointee CEO PAC to implement long overdue reforms. Agency mission failure. Currently, the USAGM by and large is not fulfilling its mission, which remains so ill-defined and ambiguous, enables organizations to go about its business largely unguided with little to no oversight. Rather than providing news and information in an accurate, reliable way that promotes and supports freedom and democracy, the agency is mismanaged, disorganized, ineffective, and rife with waste and redundancy. These shortfalls are either oriented toward or directly contribute to the agency's media organization joining the mainstream media's anti-U.S. chorus and denigrating the American story, all in the name of so-called journalistic independence. Indeed, content during the Trump administration was rife with typical mainstream media talking points assailing the president and his staff. The few bright spots within the VOA and the OCB are often stifled instead of supported. Top-level talent often leaves the agency or is met with obstacles rather than support. Opportunities for modernization and effective strategy are ignored, and wasteful spending and misallocation of resources are the norm as an environment in which nepotism is rampant and political gameship protects bad actors. Amanda Bennett was confirmed as a USAGM CEO in 2022 after 2 years of being blocked by several members of Congress. Legal advocacy organization America First Legal Foundation even wrote to President Joe Biden asking him to withdraw her nomination. Wasn't going to happen. Sorry. Wasn't going to happen. Citing several severe national security failures while she was director of the VOA. Her tenure as director during the Obama administration and her holdover in the beginning of the Trump administration was marred with operational failures, security failures, and credibility failures. Those failures are reportedly ongoing during her current tenure as CEO. Necessary reforms. Security issues. The Office of Personnel Management and the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence flagged severe security failures during 4 extensive investigations of the USAGM and conducted during a 10-year period between 2010 and 2020. Security personnel and former senior leadership ignored these issues and allowed them to persist. In brief, the USAGM is vulnerable to exploitation by foreign spies. During the last 6 months of the Trump administration, known foreign intelligence operatives were removed from the OCB and the RFE/RL. During a 10-year period between 2010 and 2020, both the OPM and the ODNI that founded the USAGM's Office of Security under the Office of Management had grossly ignored and flouted many of the federal government's most critical and long-standing information and personnel security protocols, regulations, and practices. During the investigative period, which in its findings were largely, if not wholly, ignored by senior-level leadership, over 1,500 USAGM personnel, nearly 40% of the total workforce, were performing at their Tier 3 and Tier 5 national security-sensitive positions with falsified and/or unauthorized stability for employment determinations with access to sensitive federal building and information systems. In many cases, records, including Social Security numbers, were falsified or replaced with notional placeholders and fingerprints in many dozen cases that were never submitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for basic background investigations. By the time these issues were addressed by the members of the Trump administration, more than 500 personnel were unauthorized access and clearance had left the USAGM and rolled up to other federal agencies with reciprocal clearance and authorizations. Many others disappeared into U.S. society. As of January 2021, the USAGM had not yet determined the whereabouts of these individuals. The USAGM must never again be entrusted with delegated authority over its personnel security programs and suitability determinations until such time it can prove that these failures will not happen again. These responsibilities must remain with the Department of Defense and the Office Personnel Management, to which they were transferred in the final weeks of the Trump administration. Journalists' security. Agency journalists, both on the American soil, have faced danger, yet their superiors have done little to protect them. Whistleblowers and Trump administrative officials found the protections of the USAGM American and foreign journalists employed by USAGM networks and grantee organizations was severely lacking. Against often significant resistance, political appointee forced action to enable broadcasters who were under verified threats to broadcast from remote locations while being protected by federal law and law enforcement. Likewise, political appointees met resistance from senior career officials when insisting that foreign-based journalists in high-risk countries make their locations known to the agency in the event they required rescue, extraction, or safe housing. Such safety measures, argued career officials, would somehow represent a violation of journalistic independence. With only rare exceptions, resistance to the most basic journalistic safety measures was known as a knee-jerk response from the USAGM career officials. Wasting taxpayer dollars. The USAGM's current operation managed can be conducted on less than $700 million per year. Prior to the arrival of President Donald Trump's appointees in June of 2020, budgeting, fiscal responsibility, and spending totaled over $800 million per year, with virtually no oversight or supervision. Waste, unnecessary spending, nepotism for pet projects, redundant programs, and unnecessary hiring abounded. Consolidation and reduction of redundant services. Currently, the USAGM funds numerous redundant services through its own offices, through the Voice of America and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, and through its grantees. For example, VOA has a Mandarin language service, but also funds redundant services through Radio Free Asia. VOA also has a Farsi language service that duplicates one funded through Radio Free Europe / Radio Liberty. Surplus services in the same language are often unnecessary and counterproductive. Fiscal responsibility and transparency should return to the USAGM, with consolidation being a cornerstone of the strategy. As noted previously, the Open Technology Fund duplicates activities that already exist at the USAGM in the Office of the Internet Freedom. Numerous career whistleblowers came forward to sound the alarm to President Trump's USAGM political term about the OTF's abuse and overreach. Its opaque, expensive, and unnecessary usurpation of an existing USAGM office is an egregious example of government waste and illustrates the general disdain for the U.S. taxpayer that is rife within its agency. Full reinstatement of the OIF allow the agency and congressional oversight into how so-called internet freedom money is being spent. J-1 visa program abuses. Rather than use the appropriate one visa intended for foreign journalists, the USAGM uses the J-1 cultural exchange visa to allow foreign nationals to transition easily into jobs that American citizens with cultural and linguistics expertise could satisfy. The J-1 visa is intended for cultural and academic exchange programs, among others, none of which include journalism. Additionally, J-1 visas are meant for non-immigrant temporary exchanges. The USAGM's J-1 visa holders often go on to apply for permanent residency, which violates the intention of the visa. Shortwave transmission upgrades and improvements. Non-web-based technologies that are proven and durable, such as shortwave radio transmission, have been grossly de-emphasized in budgeting in favor of the newer web-based technologies. This move is dangerously short-sighted and puts the U.S. at a perilous strategic disadvantage in the event of a major conflict, particularly with Russia or China. There is great concern about the vulnerability of undersea cable trunks that make up the internet cloud. The vast majority of the cloud internet traffic, 95%, is transmitted through these cables, including news transmissions and web-based content produced by the USAGM's broadcast networks. While the robust and popular use of the internet is ideal at peacetime, during times of major conflict, widespread damage to the undersea cables and carrying communications across the globe can reasonably be expected. Long-lasting power outages are also likely, such as those from Ukraine experienced in the aftermath of Russia's 2022 invasion. The USAGM's responsibility for the only U.S. global shortwave radio capability of critical strategic importance of America is to carry its message to people seeking information and freedom within conflict zones. Shortwave technologies also make it possible to carry broadcasts in areas where internet traffic is severely restricted, as it is many authoritarian states today. Organizational issues. Personnel. Personnel is one of the biggest concerns for the USAGM and its grantees. Attracting talented staff who will stay and letting go of poorly performing personnel are hurdles. Additionally, whistleblowers have come forward with numerous credible allegations and illegal nepotism and improper hiring practices. Past agency leaders have ignored national security procedures when hiring and have failed to adequately vet staff. Government hiring policies and federal law must be followed, and serious policy changes must be implemented to end these practices. If you're following along, we are on page 243 of the 2025 Presidential Transitional Project, The Mandate for Leadership, in Chapter 8, dealing with media agencies. That's where we currently are. We started on page 235. We are now on page 243. Personnel is one of the biggest concerns of the USAGM and its grantees. Attracting talented staff who will stay and letting go of poorly performing personnel are hurdles. Additionally, whistleblowers have come forward with numerous credible allegations of illegal nepotism. Yeah, I just read this part. I'm sure reading again. And improper hiring practices. Past agency leaders ignored national security procedures when hiring and have failed to adequately vet staff. Government hiring policies and federal law must be followed, and serious policy changes must be implemented to end these practices. Relevant government entities. The White House. The White House, an executive branch agency, the USAGM ostensibly should report to the President and coordinate activities with the National Security Council, the NSC, especially given the direct and implied national security aspects of the agency's messaging globally. However, there are currently no specific office in the White House or the NSC liaison for the USAMG. The original network, VOA, functioned under the Office Coordinator of the Information as early as 1941, the War Department Office of War Information from 1942 to 1945, the State Department from 1945 to 1953, and the U.S. Information Agency from 1953 until the creation of the Independent Broadcasting Board of Governors in 1999. Although some oversight and management functions of the agency are provided by the State Department, the USAGM otherwise has little connectivity to larger departments or agencies, and even less with the White House. With the dissolution of the U.S. Information Agency in 1999, the USAGM has virtually been under its own supervision and guidance. The results have been dismal. The State Department. Where are we? Okay. The State Department. VOA was most effective before and during the Cold War, when it was under direct supervision and control of the War and State Departments respectively. If VOA is not put in the direct chain of command under the NSC, serious consideration should be given to putting VOA under the direct supervision of the Office of Global Public Affairs at the Department of State. The Office of Global Public Affairs was formed during the Trump administration by consolidation of the State Department's Bureau of Internal Information Programs and Bureau of Global Public Affairs. just checking to make sure all my microphones are still working, and they are. Thank you. Page 244, right in the middle. Ensuring that taxpayer-funded TV, radio, and messaging tells America's story is imperative and should be coordinated with existing foreign language social media platforms at the State Department. Currently, VOA's... Oh, thank you for that. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just trying to read through this chapter. I apologize. I'm seeing gifts coming through, and I apologize if I'm not thanking you. I do thank you. I do see them. I just want to get through this chapter so that I can be able to upload this one so that we can go on. So I know, boring this morning, blah, 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 but let's get through this chapter so that I can actually download that one, and then we can discuss more. So don't worry. But I appreciate you. Thank you. Now I lost my place. Get distracted by shiny things. Ensuring that taxpayer-funded TV, radio, and messaging tells America's story is imperative and should be coordinated with existing foreign language social media platforms at the State Department. Currently, the VOA's foreign language TV programming is unreliable in telling America's story, giving it amorphous interpretation of its independence firewall and its warning adherence to certain provisions within the Smith-Mundt Act, depending upon which political party is in office. The VOA firewall is meant to protect broadcasters from government interference with content. However, the USAGM staff have abused the firewall and used it in offensive measures to block oversight. Additionally, the Smith-Mundt Act stipulates that the USAGM services are meant to tell the American story abroad, never to domestic audiences, but the agency has used its taxpayer funding to promote partisan messaging. In one of the U.S. most egregious examples was in 2020 when it bought ads on foreign language social media sites to disseminate a Biden campaign ad and targeted it to a major Muslim population in Michigan. Moreover, the VOA often airs foreign adversaries' propaganda, which is antithetical to its congressionality mandate core mission. State Department's oversight or command may be one that ensures the VOA and the rest of the USAGM returns and adheres to its original mission. Clear lines of command and communication between the USAGM and appropriate office of the National Security Council are also sorely lacking and has been a reasonable accountability for the USAGM senior leadership and strategy. The State Department's Assistant Secretary for Global Public Affairs and Undersecretary for Diplomacy and Public Affairs should also be in the accountability loop for agency's actions. While the U.S. Secretary of State technically has a seat on the board of the agency, it is a toothless seat that is often deferred to the undersecretary or the assistant secretaries noted above. This position should be relevant and its directive when the U.S. foreign policy and strategic communications are at stake. So, we are on page 245. This is the last little part of this section, and then there's one other tiny little 3-page section that talks about public broadcasting, and that's where it's going to get really important. So for this, for example, 3 years long delaying in confirming the Trump-appointed CEO left disastrous holdover leadership from the previous administration. Employing effective leadership, even in an acting capacity, while the new CEO is awaiting Senate confirmation, is necessary to prevent this type of behavior. So they want to, again, this is what they talk about, day one. They're talking about day one. Day one, they want appointments in there where they're not confirmed by Congress or Senate yet. They want people who are appointees just to be acting until. Congress. The USAGM receives its budget and mandates directly from Congress. Often changes in major function at the agency happens because of lobbying efforts of a few connected individuals, often grantees lobbying for more funds and less accountability. Those changes can and do handcuff leadership from meaningful oversight. An overhaul of the agency with review from Congress to modernize, streamline, and reduce waste must be done with congressional support. Key non-governmental stakeholder allies and non-allies. These include industry groups, nonprofits, trade associations, foundations, and activist organizations. For example, America First Legal Foundation, the USAGM Watch, the BBG USAGM Watch, and the Whistleblower Protection Project. Conclusion. The U.S. AGM is a story of lost opportunity both to help and restore the world's confidence on the promise and ideals of America to set a high mark for journalistic integrity and unbiased reporting. I'm just going to pause on that one for a minute. I'm just going to pause on that one for just a second before I really say what I want to say, because I want to get to this chapter. To accomplish this, the U.S. AGM must be fully reformed top to bottom with congressional and White House support. The possibility of consolidating not only the agency's subparts, but bringing the entire agency under the supervision of the NSC, the State Department, or both would dramatically aid that reform. If the de facto aim of the agency simply remains to compete in foreign markets using anti-U.S. talking points that parrot America's adversaries and propaganda, that has been used 3 times now in this 10 pages. That same parroting. The parrot is parroting. That's crazy. Then it represents an unacceptable burden to the U.S. taxpayer and a negative return on investment. In that case, the U.S. AGM should be defunded and de-established. Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you for that vote, Hannah. Thank you for joining the team. Thank you, guys. So remember, in that case, what they're saying is all of this talking point. In that case, the U.S. AGM should be defunded and de-established. Thank you for the heart hands. Again, guys, I don't mean to not see them, and I don't mean to not recognize you. I am simply reading, but I do appreciate it. It lets me do what I do. It lets me do what I love, and it gives you guys the information. But don't remember, I will upload this to my YouTube when I am done. You can listen live on Twitter, and I am still working on summaries. And those will still take a while. Don't worry. But I want to get all the information out. If, however, the agency can be reformed to become an effective tool, it will be one of the greatest tools in American arsenal to tell America's story and promote freedom and democracy around the world. So, that was that one section in Chapter 8. There are 2 sections here in Chapter 8. So that one, again, started... Beep, beep, beep. That one started, that was 235 through 246. Woo! We got through a lot that day. The DNC starts tonight, so I want to get as much of this information out as possible so that you can listen to it later and then we can summarize after that. See how that works? It's brilliant. Now, here's the one that gets me just a little bit crazy. So I will be very cautious in how I speak this, because this is what got me bananaed last time. This little section, 246, 247, and this little bit on 248 is what caught my eye in this chapter. We talk about when we read these chapters out loud. Bunch of stuff I don't know, I haven't heard, I'm not familiar with what's going on here. And then that one little part. This is the part we're referring to. This is what got me bananaed. So we're going to go very calm, very quiet, very collected, very fact-finding, and then later on we'll do feelings. So stay with me for it. Corporation for Public Broadcasting, page 246. Again, 246, Chapter 8. Every Republican president since Richard Nixon has tried to strip the Corporation for Public Broadcasting of taxpayer funding. That is significant not just because it means for half a century Republican presidents have failed to accomplish what it set out to do, but also because Nixon was the first president in office when the National Public Radio, NPR, and the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, which the CPB funds, went on air. In other words, all Republican presidents have recognized that public funding for domestic broadcast is a mistake. As a 35-year-old lawyer in the Nixon White House, when Antonin Scalia, former SCOTUS, you remember that, warned that conservatives were being confronted with a long-range problem of significant social consequence, that is the development of government-funded broadcast system similar to the BBC. Oh, hi, Halo, how are you? Again, I'm trying to maintain a very professional stance just to read through this part because I have a lot of big feelings about it and don't want to get bananaed again. So, We'll keep it coy, and then we won't. You know what I mean? We'll keep it coy, and then we won't. All of which is meant for the next conservative president must finally get this done and do it despite opposition from congressional members of his own party if necessary. Her party, but okay. Her party. It's going to be Kamala's party. Anyway. We're going to keep it. We're going to keep our down just a little bit for these next 3 pages, and then later on we can talk. Okay. Sorry, I put 2 stops in. All of which this means the next conservative president must finally get this done and do it despite opposition from congressional members of his own party if necessary. To stop public funding is good policy and good politics. The reason is simple. President Lyndon Johnson may have pledged in 1967 that public broadcasting would become a vital public resource to enrich our homes, educate our families, provide assistance to our classrooms, but public broadcasting immediately became a liberal form of public affairs and not journalism, saying that NPR and PBS are liberal. Stay with me. Not only is the federal government trillions of dollars in debt and unable to afford the more than $500 million squandered on leftist opinion each year, but the government should not be compelling the conservative half of the country to pay for the suppression of its own views. NPR, PBS, Sesame Street, news. Keep it. As Thomas Jefferson put it, to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. Oh, look at Halo going with the 2 funnies. Girl, I'm trying to keep it just a little subdued, just to get through it so that I can upload it. A demonstrated pattern of bias. Page 246 at the bottom. Conservatives will thus reward a president who eliminates this tyrannical situation. PBS and NPR do not even bother to run programming that would attract conservatives. As Pew Research demonstrated in 2014, 25% of PBS's audience is mostly liberal, and 35% is consistently liberal. That is 60% liberal compared to the 15% conservatives, 11% mostly conservative, 4% consistently. NPR's audience is even to the left of that, with only 67% liberal, 41% consistently, 26% mostly, compared with 12% conservative, 3% and 9% consistently conservative and mostly conservative, respectively. That may be an acceptable business model for MSNBC or CNN, but not for a taxpayer-subsidized broadcaster. Page 247. Take a drink. Defunding through the budgetary process. Cutting off the CPB is logistically easy. The solution lies in the budgetary process. In 2022, the CPB submitted to the Labor, Health, Human Services, Education, and Related Agencies Subcommittee of the House of the Senate Appropriations Committee its budget justification for fiscal year 2023. In it, the CPB requested that Congress give its $565 million advance appropriation a $40 million increase compared to fiscal year 2022 funding. Unlike most other agencies, the CPB, which has NPR and PBS, receives advance appropriations that provide them with funding 2 years ahead of time, which insulates the agency from Congress's power of the purse and oversight. I'm finding it. The special budgetary treatment is unjustified and should be ended. The 47th president can just tell Congress through the budget he proposes and through personal contact that he will not sign an appropriation spending bill that contains 1 penny for CPB. The president may have to use the bully pulpit. That is an actual word in the middle of the page, 247, as NPR and PBS have teams of lobbyists who have convinced enough members of Congress to save their bacon every time their taxpayers' subsidies have been at risk since the Nixon era. Defunding CPB would by no means cause NPR or PBS or other public broadcasters that benefit from CPB funding, including the even further to the left Pacifica Radio and America Public Media, to file for bankruptcy. Lord Jesus, take the wheel. The membership model that the CPB uses, along with the funding from corporations and foundations that it also receives, would allow broadcasters to continue to thrive. As George Will wrote, if Sesame Street programming were put up for auction, the danger would be of getting trampled by the stampede of potential bidders. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the vote stickers, guys. This is the section I got bananaed on last time, okay? So I'm really not trying to put my whole ass into it right now. I'm just trying to read through it, and it's, you should see my feet just a tapping. Indeed, Sesame Street is on HBO now, which shows it has the potential as a money earner. Public interest versus privilege. Okay. Stripping public funding would of course mean that NPR, PBS, Pacifica Radio, and other leftist broadcasters would be shorn of the presumption that they can act in the public interest and receive the privileges that often accompany so acting. They should no longer, for example, be qualified as non-commercial education stations. Which they clearly no longer are. I see Mama Karen has joined the chat. Hi, Mama K. Keep it up. It's totally fine. NPR, Pacifica, and other radio venues have zero claim on educational function, the original purpose for which they were created with President Johnson, and the percentage of on-air programming that PBS devotes to educational endeavors such as Sesame Street, programs that they themselves are biased to the left, is small. Breathe, deep breath. Being an NCE comes with benefits. The Federal Communications Commission, for example, reserves that 20 stations at the lower end of the radio frequency between 88 and 108 megahertz on the FM band for the NCEs. The FCCs that only non-commercial educational radio stations are licensed between 88 and 92 megahertz reserved band, while both commercial and non-commercial education stations may operate in the non-reserved band. This confers advantages as lower frequency stations can be heard farther away and are easier to find as they lie on the left end of the radio dial, figuratively as well as ideologically. Okay. The FCC also exempts NCE stations from licensing fees. it says that non-commercial education, NCE, FM station license, and full-service NCE television broadcast station licenses are exempt from paying regulatory fees, provided that these stations operate solely on the NCE basis. NPR and PBS stations are in reality no longer non-commercial, as they run ads in everything but name for their sponsors. They are also non-educational. The next president should instruct the FCC to exclude the stations affiliated with PBS and NPR from the NCE denomination and the privileges that come with it. So they want to strip the appropriations funding. They want to get rid of it altogether. And they no longer want NPR and PBS to have non-commercial education station status. That was Chapter 8 that started on 235 through 252. 235 through 252. I'm going to end this and I'm going to come right back.